In the wake of MIT's 95% study, now everyone is talking about the scourge of Workslop. So what is it? Is it actually a thing? And if it is a thing, what do we do about it? Welcome back to the AI Daily Brief. This being a weekend episode, it seemed like the perfect time to dig into the latest study that is consuming an outsized portion of media attention in and around AI. Hot on the heels of MIT's endlessly referenced 95% failure rate study, which you'll remember suggested that 95% of AI efforts were failing and got just an absolute boatload of press before people realized that it was based on interviews with 52 executives and a public reading of earnings statements, where if an organization hadn't explicitly reported that AI was contributing to revenue growth, that was considered a failure. It's very clear that people are interested right now in narratives around AI underperformance. And this week, that came home to roost in and around this discussion of new research from a team-up between Stanford Social Media Lab and BetterUp, which is a company selling workforce training and support, that honed in on the idea of AI-generated workslop. The Harvard Business Review writes, AI-generated workslop is destroying productivity. In Fortune, we get AI promised to revolutionize productivity. Instead, workslop is a giant time suck and the scourge of the 21st century office. CNBC writes, AI-generated workslop is here. It's killing teamwork and causing a multi-million-dollar productivity problem. And there on the homepage of this company, BetterUp, workslop is the new busywork and it's costing millions. BetterUp defines workslop as AI-generated content that looks good but lacks substance. They say it creates the illusion of progress. Slick slides, lengthy reports, overly tightened summaries, or code without context. Rather than saving time, it leaves colleagues to do the real thinking and cleanup. In a survey of 1,150 US desk workers conducted just a couple of weeks ago, 40% of the people they surveyed said that they had received workslop in the past month. The researchers argue that it takes 2 hours of average time to resolve each incident of workslop, leading to a monthly cost of $186 per employee and $9 million annually for a 10,000-person company. Now, I am much more interested in the conversation generally than in the context of this specific report. Look, ultimately, BetterUp is a company that is trying to sell a solution to workslop, and they are using research about workslop to justify why you should be hiring them or using their products to solve said problem. No disrespect at all there. I actually think that this sort of approach to marketing is authentic, clear, value additive in the sense that it generates content that you can engage with, whether you choose to come to the same conclusions as them or not. But at the end of the day, it does have a particular motivation. If it didn't support a story that led to this particular company's products, they wouldn't publish it. But like I said, whereas I have been basically universally hostile to the MIT study and everything around it, this workslop conversation is, I think, more important, regardless of anything having to do with the study itself. Basically, what I think is that where we find ourselves is an inevitable waypoint in the story of AI for work adoption. It's a point that we were always going to have to deal with. I believe, as you can probably tell from the title of this episode, that workslop is not, in fact, an AI problem. I think it is instead a human and organizational problem. Consequently, I don't think the solution is an AI solution. I think that it is a human and organizational solution or set of solutions. Basically, I think where we are is that AI is revealing and exacerbating much more fundamental work issues, and that to address the scourge and challenge of workslop, we're going to have to address some very core issues. Now, first of all, let's try to define what we're even talking about with this. VrasserX nails it when they write, everyone talks about AI slop, but nobody agrees on what it actually is. They point, however, to a new paper from collaborators at Northeastern University, Stony Brook University, and Meta that actually tries to put some definitions around slop. In short, AI slop is not things like bad grammar. Instead, it is those ponderous fingerprints that instantly give you a sense that what you're reading is from an AI. As Vrasser sums up, it's verbosity, vagueness, repetition, and incoherence. It's characteristics of writing that people do too. As they put it, the study shows slop is less about machines versus humans and more about the hidden signals that make writing feel sloppy or sharp. Now, if we expand this type of definition out to the broader set of quote-unquote workslop, which can include not just written words, but also certain types of imagery, slide decks, etc., I think that those same patterns of verbosity, vagueness, repetition, incoherence all follow, and I think that BetterUp's definition of content that looks good but lacks substance, that feeling of a sort of hollowness, also helps ground us as well. So let's talk about what isn't the issue here, and that is AI model performance. Now, it is absolutely the case that there are certain hallmarks of AI that tend to tip content over into this realm of slop. We just heard some of them, and often the native generations that come out of certain tools are going to have some element of that slopness. I also think that there are certain categories of tools that aren't really good enough yet for a lot of the use cases that we want them to be good for, at least not with full autonomy. The creation of slide presentations, PowerPoints, etc., for example, I think AI tools can help with, and certainly there are a lot of people using tools like Gamma, but there are real limits to how autonomously you can let those tools run right now. Still, the point is that contra to what basically every one of these articles tries to imply, both in their headline and in their substance, the issue here is not AI underperforming. Simply put, the models are good enough to generate valuable things. And to put it differently, when the model is not generating work of value, it is in very many cases less about the raw capabilities of the model itself, and instead about the context of the person who is trying to get that work out of it. I think at core, more than anything else, what the abundance of Workslop is showing is the brokenness of the fundamental incentives of work in most settings. Specifically, AI is revealing just how much of work is people doing things pretty much just to be seen to be doing things. It is a byproduct of a focus on task execution rather than goal completion. It's an issue, in other words, of where we have intentionally or unintentionally structured work performance to be based on measuring inputs versus outputs. In the settings where work slop is proliferating, my strong guess is that many people who are presenting that work slop believe explicitly or implicitly that what they need to do to be successful in their job, at least insofar as it relates to retaining their job or getting promoted in their job, is about showing off the raw amount of stuff that they did. And AI is revealing that you can do a lot without accomplishing much. And this is, I think, the core issue. AI can be used in two wildly divergent and differing ways, depending on where incentives are at work. If the incentive is to simply show off how much you've done, to present an endless parade of slides, an endless set of idea memos, AI will oblige. It can output more than you've ever been able to possibly do without any regard for how useful any of that doing actually is. If, on the other hand, you or your organization are outcome focused, and the goal is not how much can I produce, but in fact, how efficiently can we achieve our goals, AI can also be extremely good for that in a way that will tend not to produce reams and reams of documents, because that would actually run counter to the efficiency of accomplishing the goal. All of which is to say that the first and most obvious way to combat work slop is to shift your organization's incentives from measuring inputs, i.e., how much stuff people do, to measuring outputs. How effectively and efficiently did they get their goals accomplished? Now, a related issue is that it's not just the incentives to show that you're doing a bunch that screw all of this up, but also the fact that AI is revealing that huge portions of the work that is assigned is completely unnecessary. This is in many ways the organizational and structural embodiment of the problem that we were just talking about before, where work is assigned effectively to make it seem like everyone's doing something, rather than figuring out how to actually accomplish what it is that moves the organization or company forward. In other words, I think one of the things that Workslop is doing is revealing that the work that was done just wasn't really necessary in many cases in the first place. When I posted about this on LinkedIn, Chris O'Dell provided this scenario. A teacher says, "Students, don't use AI to write this, use your brain." The students respond, "But the assignment is unnecessary work, and my brain says AI can do it faster." A boss says, "Use AI to do this, because the assignment is unnecessary work and AI can do it faster." The employee asks, "Why are we even doing this assignment then?" And the boss has no real answer. Chris concludes, "I think the real power of AI transformations is revealing what's mission critical to actually producing outcomes and what is just extraneous processes enterprises have built up over time." Professor Ethan Malik tweeted about this. He wrote, "I think the idea of work slop is not that helpful, as it places the burden of appropriate AI use on workers who are given AI tools and told to increase productivity, without efforts by managers to figure out which processes to change or define what good AI productivity looks like." Putting it more simply, he writes, "Make more PowerPoints as an organizational incentive is not going to work out well." Pessimistically, he concludes, "I suspect Workslop will become a way to shift responsibility from workers and managers to AI. See, the AI did bad work. It's nobody's fault but the AI that made us send useless documents. Bad AI." Which brings us to a third and related issue, that naturally falls out of people having to do all sorts of work that they know to be not really all that relevant for accomplishing the mission or goals of the organization, which is people becoming anesthetized to the tasks that they have to do in a day in and day out way. This is the entire substance of the movie Office Space from 25 years ago. What is it exactly that you would say you do here? Well, Bob, let me tell you about TPS reports. And so in all of these areas, we have causes and remediations that are not about AI. When incentives are warped towards being seen to do work rather than accomplishing goals efficiently, well, then we have to design new incentive structures that focus on accomplishing goals and prioritize the efficiency with which that gets done. Secondly, given how much work is actually unnecessary in just those legacy built-up processes, we need to use our new focus on accomplishing goals with efficiency to eliminate and hack apart busy work and unproductive tasks that were generously about legacy processes that never changed, and much less generously just about work theater, and get those things out of the way. We need to eliminate fake work. And then lastly, we need to get alignment and buy-in between leadership and the teams around that new way of working. I think that any organization that was dealing with the problem of work slop, if they did these things, would find a massive decrease in that problem very, very quickly. And yet, even with that solved, I do think that there will still be problems with work slop specifically. In other words, the way in which certain AI work gets outputted. And that's because it is not necessarily intuitive in all cases to know how to use these tools, to understand what a good version of tool usage looks like, or to know where these tools are going to struggle and produce subpar outcomes. A lot of the work here is in the same things that we've been giving lip service to for 2 years now, but not really accomplishing, which is investing in and helping your team actually know how to use these tools. TLDR is that I'm sorry, but you are simply not going to get out of the problem of work slop without actually investing in your people. So what does that look like? Just give them some credits for Coursera courses and that'll do the trick, right? Wrong. First of all, I think we need to model what quality outputs actually look like. For example, for people that have a lot of presentations as a part of their job, do they know the difference between a presentation or an essay or an image or whatever it is that they're trying to output that is clearly good versus clearly bad, or the more tricky one, which is often the problem with AI, something that is masquerading as good when it is actually bad? If people don't have those templates, then they don't know what they're striving to achieve. Think about this study. We're throwing around this term work slop without actually understanding exactly what it means, which leaves us basically to ask our employees to know it when they see it and figure out how to do something about it, even though we haven't defined it. Step one, we got to model quality outputs versus outputs that are insufficient. Second, people need space and support to learn how to interact with the models to accomplish those good outputs. This is, yes, prompt engineering, but it's also context engineering. And once again, it's about more than a course. It is about space and support and time for people to get the reps and the time on task to actually figure this out. We've recently been running analysis on the now thousands and thousands of interviews we've conducted with execs as part of our agent readiness audits. And one of the things that comes up absolutely most often as a huge blocker, a huge barrier to actually getting value out of AI, is the problem of, I don't have time to learn how to use the tool that's supposed to save me time. So many organizations right now are encouraging their people or even mandating their people to use these new tools, but they're not simultaneously saying, and by the way, Thursday afternoon from 1 to 3, do nothing but try to use those tools. They're not creating structured space and support for people to do those things. They're just basically assigning homework on top of their normal jobs. Third, this is one that will seem completely obvious in retrospect, or maybe it won't because it'll be obviated by agents that just outperform in the future. But there needs to be a culture of AI editing and iteration that doesn't just take the default output, but instead works with it and shifts the burden and balance of time from initial creation to editing, trimming, and perfecting. Just to give you guys an example, as I was preparing for this particular episode, here are the pages and pages of different versions of the cover image that I was exploring in advance of doing the episode. Different style, different approaches, different prompting. I would be massively underutilizing these tools if I was just taking the first or even the second or third thing that it gave me and not going back and trying to interact with it to get exactly what I wanted out of it. But I don't necessarily think that that's super intuitive to people. The raw outputs are so powerful that I think a lot of folks think, well, that's good enough. Now, one group that has really had to live inside this mindset shift throughout the year is, of course, software engineers. Basically, agentic coding got so good this year, so fast, so performant, so powerful, that it really was no longer a question of if coders were going to use these tools. It was more about what new challenges did these new patterns of usage create that became the new things we had to figure out how to work with. In other words, the question with agentic coding was not, can AI do everything all on its own? It was whether the new challenges that an AI-mediated process creates are worth it for the value it provides by shifting how much can get output in general. You might remember we talked about this Google Cloud study of 5,000 developers earlier in the week. They found significant increase in a huge number of desirable areas, including total amount of code output, quality of code output, and a number of other factors like that. But they also simultaneously found an increase in some things that weren't as desirable, like code instability. Rune from OpenAI even joked, "I've forgotten how to program as of this past month. I just beg and plead with Codex and GPT-5 to do it. Many times it works, but I'm clearly just being lazy." Now that's obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the point is that developers are in the midst of this adaptation where they're not viewing it as strictly static, they're seeing their job shift around them and changing their behaviors on that basis. I think basically that everyone's going to need to have more of a manager mindset. They're going to need to be able to think and organize and plan out goals that actually move whatever their role or responsibilities are forward. They're going to have to figure out how to delegate parts of that to AI and agents. And they're going to have to work with the outputs that come back to make sure that they are actually all moving in sync towards whatever that set of goals is. And so to sum up, my argument is not that Workslop isn't a problem, but that it is not an AI problem and is instead a human and organizational problem. I think to change it, we have to think first in terms of organizational structures. We need to change incentives to focus on accomplishing goals, not just being seen to do work. We need to eliminate all the fake work that happens all over the place, simply because it always has. And we need to align our teams around those new ways of doing business. Then, with our teams aligned, we need to support them. We need to help people model what quality outputs actually look like, give them structured space and support to figure out how to work with these tools to get those sort of quality outputs. We need to encourage editing, reminding people that the first generations are not the end product that they're going to turn in. We need everyone to think differently about their roles and about their relationships with these new powerful digital assistants and employees they have. And with that, I believe, this productivity-destroying scourge of Workslop can be beaten back and defeated, relegated to the junk heap of history as a frustrating, inevitable, but ultimately surmountable part of the transition between the pre-AI and the post-AI work world. What do you think? What am I missing on this conversation about Workslop? Can we overcome this? Is there too much inherent human laziness that we're never going to be able to work out? Does all of this just get solved because agents come along and get more performant and more autonomous and cut us out of the equation entirely? Let me know what you think in the comments. For now, that's going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Appreciate you listening or watching as always. And until next time, peace